Buonasera a tutti. Good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners. Also, be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past video interviews. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo. Grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. So what a true honor and pleasure to have Martina Savoca Guay with us, talking about her own rediscovery of one of Nancy Savoca's masterpieces, Household Saints, a film that came out in 1993, where actually Martina was in her mom's belly. So she's going to tell us what making this beautiful documentary, The Many Miracles of a Household Saint, meant for her, that continuity, the getting into her parents' head as this beautiful production was going on, and will enable us to then enjoy even further the new release of the Household Saint that is probably going to the new restoration, 4K restoration. But before we bring Martina on with us, a little pubblicità. Do you want parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring in person or online to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at istitutomondoitaliano.org. Martina, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Viviana. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, as I said, I had the pleasure and honor to watch your documentary of a beautiful movie that unfortunately I didn't watch myself because I was still in Italy, living in Italy. And as the documentary is being shown, I'm getting messages, oh, you should get in touch with Martina. It's a beautiful work and so forth. So here we are having this conversation about your documentary on the many miracles of Household Saints. But for those that might not be familiar with you and your background, I'm interested in learning a little bit about yourself and your current and previous work, and maybe some of the messages that you've been focusing on with your work.
Yes. So I've worked in film and television and commercial production for a bit over 10 years now. It infected me the same way it infected my parents all those years ago. And I've made a few short films of my own outside of my day jobs that have kept me going, and have had some passion projects. What I love to do is it's just always really character-driven work, which is kind of a nod as well to the way that Household Saints is. My parents' film. To me, what I love is keeping the story really focused on character-driven stories, and not so much focusing on like location or on location or anything that kind of would distract from the core of the human story, because I think that that's where we can all kind of connect and relate. So that's what I'm most interested in, and I feel like Household Saints does that beautifully.
So you said that you've been infected at
Yes.
a very early age.
Yes.
So there are a couple of things. I think by rewatching an interview to Nancy, she was talking about how maybe, and she was 11 years old, and a teacher recommended a book that requires some parents' clearance. And how that story also unfolded, getting that permission because of grandmother probably not being completely fluent into the English language, but how eventually that experience really triggered Nancy's desire or acknowledgement, that awareness that she wanted to tell a story, and she was only 11 years old. I think that was probably pretty powerful. But then I imagine you growing up with so much talent, the sets, maybe as we were reading fairy tales, you read scripts, or or maybe not giving it for granted because you grew up in that environment, you wanted to embrace it for yourself. So was there anything, was it just a natural process or maybe a specific instance that triggered your choice, your infection?
Honestly, I was absolutely very, very close to my parents. Where growing up, I was always involved. Not and I wanted to be. I have two older brothers. They were involved as well. We were always on set. We were always doing child labor of some sort. From as little as I can remember, always knew how to be quiet on a film set. But my brothers didn't go exactly in the direction that I went into. And I think that over the years, as I was a child, I had an interest in acting. I had an interest in cinematography, in editing, in writing, but it was always in that world. It never really left that world. Um, and I, I think that there was a fairy tale aspect to it and a magic to it, but then there was also something very real that my parents never hid either, which was the struggles of it, the disappointments in it. That was never kind of sugar coated for me either. So I knew what I was getting into. My parents, they have always been supportive and encouraging, but they certainly didn't steer me in that direction. I went there myself.
Wonderful. So obviously we will be talking about the movie, and if you do allow me, I would like to share a trailer of what the new 4K restoration is going to look like and feel like. And then we'll dive into your work and the movie at the same time, because at this point I feel that the two conversations cannot be
Exactly.
separated one from the other. So let's do a little sharing here, and
it happened by the grace of God. And it happened by the grace of God that Joseph Santangelo won his wife in a pinochle game.
You're cooking tomorrow. We got company coming for supper.
I know your daughter.
Joseph Santangelo and his mother.
Oh, God, him.
What's the matter? You don't like him?
No.
Too bad. He likes you.
Are you?
Yes, I am.
Are your gums bleeding? Because if your gums bleed, it's a girl.
Yeah. Holy Saint Anna, Mother of our Blessed Virgin, please keep me from giving birth to a chicken.
Oh, Santo mio, I don't ask for no miracles. Only a simple explanation.
Man deals, and God stacks the deck.
So that is my sin, to want too much.
there are so many I think topics and covered in this in this movie. So we will try to tackle them one by one. The first one, I think, is probably the I don't know if I should keep this question first or last. Why making this documentary, and what did the process entail? It's 3 questions, and what that mattered to you. So maybe let's start with the why.
Yes. Yeah. So this was really the initial goal of this was to celebrate the restoration, the revival of Household Saints. It's a bit of a background story. The film was lost for the better part of, I want to say, 20 years, which meant that there was no way to physically screen the film. The elements had been missing. And when a film does not go over to digital, for streaming purposes, those elements are all you have to physically screen the film. So that was lost. It became a story that actually led to a beautiful organization called Missing Movies that my parents are behind, along with many other incredible filmmakers and distributors and entertainment lawyers and just a wonderful board of people. But Household Saints was really kind of what kicked that off. The film was missing, and eventually the elements were discovered. In celebration of that discovery, a 4K restoration was made, and there's a lot in between there. But when those elements were rediscovered, an electronic press kit was found amongst those elements. And it was one of the first of its kind in 1993. People weren't really going on set and interviewing the filmmakers and the cast and crew of films. That wasn't very common. So Household Saints was one of those first few films that had that experience where somebody came on set and were doing interviews, filming behind the scenes footage of different scenes being captured. So when the elements of Household Saints were found, this incredible footage of all these interviews with the actors, interviews with my parents, were discovered. And as the distributors of the 4K restoration of Household Saints found this out, that this was there, it was actually the distributor's idea. How wonderful would it be to have a DVD bonus of some type of documentary of this material? And it was actually my mother who said, oh, well, my daughter's a filmmaker. She was in my belly at the time that Household Saints was in production and came out in post-production. I arrived, not very convenient timing, but right in the middle of post-production for the film. And so she said, wouldn't it be great if Martina did something with this material? So my parents approached me with it. I looked over the interview footage and kind of everything we had, and it was a lot to wrap my head around, but I knew somebody else could have done it. Obviously, it would have been a very different perspective. And I knew that a documentary was going to be made no matter what. The original goal was to have it be a celebration and to have it be a DVD bonus. And now it's kind of taken on a life of its own. Yesterday, we were in Huntington, Long Island, screening the film at Cinema Arts Center. Beautiful turnout, beautiful reception that both Household Saints and the documentary got. And so it's just been a joy and a surprise. To answer your second question, so that's kind of what the catalyst of it all. This material was found, and we just knew we had to do something with it. Mm-hmm. The process of that was immediately getting my wonderful friend and editor, Ben Sharif, who's edited all my personal projects, my short films. We've had a longstanding friendship and creative collaboration partnership, getting him involved. And I called him on the phone. I said, this is not a texting conversation. We need to talk on the phone. And I gave him the background. And I said, listen, we don't have a lot of money. We need to do this in a certain kind of time frame to have it align with the re-release of Household Saints. Are you interested? And his immediate reaction was, my God, this is a legacy project. Wow. Yes, I'm in. And truly, I could not have done it without him. What ended up happening is we both started looking at the footage more. I read the novel Household Saints for the first time, that the film is obviously an adaptation of. A wonderful novel by Francine Prose. I read that. I was watching Household Saints over and over, which I don't remember watching as a child. It's the only film of my parents that I don't, and I've watched all of my parents' films more times than I could possibly count, know the storylines, know the background information, have memories from a lot of the film sets, but not Household Saints. So going into it kind of blind, just kind of downloading this material and figuring out how I was going to approach it. And what ended up happening was we realized with the interview footage of my parents and of Francine Prose, who was also interviewed on the film set at that time in 92, was I knew I needed a present day interview with the three of them. And I was so grateful that Francine was open and that my parents were open to it. And as we had that discussion and interviewed them in present day, I kind of started seeing a conversation between them then on that film set and them now. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what the layout ended up being was they were finishing each other's sentences, past them and present them. And so we kind of just went forth with that as the kind of concept. And we started making these little, my editor and I started making these little vignettes. He would send me these conversations back and forth. And some of them made it in the film, and some of them, I mean, you could make a million little short documentaries from all the material that we had, but we wanted to keep it focused. And so that's kind of what the process was just, how can we carry on this conversation and make people want to be involved in it as they watch?
Yeah. And so it must have been also, I mean, pretty emotional in a good way to be part of a project that you were physically present but unaware of, because Nancy was pregnant with you, and now you're actively contributing for the next generations to come. And what's interesting is that also, I think this type of work kind of also study what people have done prior to us. It's always been a philosophy of your mother as well, in film school and so forth. One thing is having great ideas moving forward, but it's equally important to see what has been done, and what an example to study, so to speak, for you.
Yes. And that's kind of the thing too of the importance of this organization, Missing Movies. It's exactly in line with just making sure that those films don't disappear, because we use that. Filmmakers today, in my generation, in generations to come, generations before me, we have to pull from somewhere. And if that's not available to us, who do we look to then?
Mhm.
And so absolutely, like, looking at Household Saints and what my parents were able to do with that, and just always being creative about the things that they really want to make, they will find a way. And it could take a few years, it could take decades, but they will keep pushing. Um, and that's absolutely one thing that I took from them, and I'm inspired by. But yeah, the material, I mean, there are some stories that all of a sudden, as I'm watching this, I'm just having a different connection to. There are some stories I never heard of before making this, from them, or just seeing things with a completely different perspective, especially as an adult, especially where I'm at in my life and in my career. It all held a very different significance. We now have grandchildren in the family that, are coming up and looking at this and understanding what Nonna does, and what Tia Martina does. And it's really exciting to see that as well.
So you just talked about Nonna. So is your family, I think your father was your grandfather, sorry, from Sicily, then moved to Argentina, and then eventually ended up in the Bronx. And there is a town in Sicily, it's called Savoca. But is that his place of origin, or just a pure coincidence?
He is from Gran Michele
Okay.
in Catania. And, you would have to ask my mother. I feel like there is some connection. I know that we visited the town when I was very, very little. But there is definitely ties there, and we brought back my grandfather again when I was a child to Gran Michele, and to visit, because we still have family there, and to visit, and it was just an incredible experience, bringing him back there. He was born there as a baby, was brought to Argentina, and spent a good amount of his young adult life there, and then moved his family to the United States, to the Bronx. So it's very Italian American. I still have a bunch of family in the Bronx. But yes, very Sicilian.
And we will talk about those elements in the movie. But you touched upon how the story came about, and I think that was also another miracle. It's like there are so many events that are around the making of Household Saints, because I believe your mother was working, I think it was during her studies, she was in charge of some sort of children's program, or she was doing a lot of reading when she came across the book.
Yes. Yes, she was working when she was at film school. She was working interning for a production company that specialized in like after school programs.
Mhm.
And so her job, one of her jobs and her favorite job was reading book reviews to find material that this production company could go and try to get the rights to make some type of special for. And in doing that, she read a New York Times book review for Household Saints,
Mhm.
read that there was a little girl in it, said, oh, maybe this could be fitting. Ended up just completely mesmerized by just the review alone, was so intriguing to her, read the novel, and basically said, this is, I know this girl, I know this family. Um, I don't know how this author knew my life so well, and put it in a
Wow.
book.
Mhm.
And then wrote a love letter to the author, Francine Prose, wrote a love letter to Francine saying, I'm in film school. Um, I'm not able to do it right now, but one day I hope to have the money to make this a movie.
Mhm.
And Francine actually kept that letter all those years. About 10 years later, my mom was finally in a position, after her second film, Dogfight, was finally in a position to look around with my father and say, what are we going to do next? And she said, I want that book. I want to make Household Saints. So approached Francine at that point, and that's when she discovered she had kept the letter for the better part of a decade.
Wow. So obviously it seems to it feels in your documentary there was a match made in heaven. You talked about that complicity, that mutual understanding, almost onset, offset. I think the lives of your family and Francine's family all of a sudden became just one, and it's the energy that again from the documentary you do get that beautiful understanding of someone's ideas and then how to visually create it. Now, the creation of a movie, I mean, we might think is, we might think about all the glamorous aspects, but then there is the practical. Let's get some money to make it happen. Which wasn't, that you just knock on the door, you call someone and they say, would you like to finance this movie? So your father, you talked about being perseverant. And I think,
Yeah, he just would not take no for an answer.
mhm,
He went to everybody he could possibly think of. At that time, they were in a very good position
mhm,
to make what they wanted, and it was still difficult. They had won Sundance with their first film, True Love. They had a good reputation behind them. They were being taken seriously. It was just
mhm,
it was challenging material that people were scared to touch.
mhm,
Something that I just found so interesting was how the American market really liked the first half of the book, which is a story about these three generations in an Italian American family in Little Italy. And they did not want to touch the second part of the book, which is a girl who who just wants to become a saint.
mhm,
um, and the European market thought that the Italian American three generational kind of family story had already been done. They had seen
mhm,
it. They were more interested in making the second half of the film about the girl who wanted to become a saint. So nobody wanted to make both, though, and they were really dug their heels in about, they felt passionate that you couldn't have one without the other.
mhm,
You needed it as the whole story. So what ended up happening, which also at that time was pretty common in kind of a home video market, which was ultimately what Household Saints kind of was made for. My mother would say you would call it content today. It was so studios would have content to put out on VHS tapes for the home video market. And that's what Household Saints was made by. But what was common was getting the funding for those types of films in a really piecemeal way.
mhm.
So the way that things were financed was crazy and kind of propped up in really interesting ways. And so, yeah, they gathered a team of people that felt, maybe didn't understand entirely the story, but were inspired by the director and
Mhm.
trusted her.
Yes. Well, talking about the story, we have kind of glanced over in bits and pieces, but for those that haven't had the pleasure to watch it, can we kind of give a little recollection of what the movie is about?
Yes. Some people will tell you it's very hard to describe, and I don't blame them. The way that I would put it is the story of 3 generations of women in an Italian American family in Little Italy. And what ends up happening is a mother gives birth to the daughter, and that youngest generation her has a desire to become a saint. And is she crazy? Is she not? That's for you to decide.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think that that's why it's hard to describe, because there's so much more to it, but in a nutshell,
Mhm.
that's how
Yes, and also the how did the main character, let's talk also about the actors that were casted, because they are very recognizable names, but he ended up winning his wife at a game
Yes.
at the table.
Yes, the story kicks off with a young man winning his wife in a pinochle game. And it becomes a beautiful relationship, and from that relationship stems a daughter who's a miracle in her own right, and they did not know what they were going to get with her.
And then there is also the chicken prop, and I was wondering because there are some superstitions around it, and I think also that kind of capture also, I would say, some of the aspects of also the immigrant community. There are many different layers, so let's not just focus on this superstition. But was your mom ever a little superstitious because she was pregnant with you? So any of the scenes might also reflect what she was feeling. She was working on a set. She's pregnant. There is so much going on. So.
Well, what's so funny is that all of that is in the novel, right? But what she didn't know at the time when it was greenlit to make the film was that she would be pregnant again for the third time. She had experienced being in production and post-production, making a film while pregnant. I was not the first one, actually. She can kind of count her first 3 films by her children. Um, but she didn't know that that was going to align that way, and I don't think it was, I think she kind of, from what she's told me, just powered through and didn't try to think about it a lot and kind of tell herself she wasn't afraid, but she was
Mhm.
absolutely afraid to be dealing with that kind of material at the
Mhm.
same time, and wondering kind of what impact it would have on me.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that also, people on the film set, Tracy Ullman, who's a star of the film, my mom took her, in the film Joseph Santangelo, he's a butcher, right?
Mhm.
And there's a scene that, I won't spoil anything, but that little those chicken wings, a superstitious thing, but it also, it's a very fun kind of storyline, kind of plot in Household Saints. But in preparation for this very special scene of watching a turkey get slaughtered when
Mhm.
Tracy Ullman's character is pregnant, they in pre-production went to a halal butcher
Mhm.
because my mom wanted Tracy to get a feel for what she was experiencing,
Mhm.
and she was pregnant at the same time, so she witnessed that herself while I was kicking around. There was also, as production got further in and my due date was approaching, she was having contractions, at the end of every day of filming, and
Mhm.
just staying in the car and
Mhm.
waiting for kind of me to calm down
Yeah.
to go inside. So yeah, it was definitely, uh against all odds, she just kept
Mhm.
going. I don't know if I could do the same, to be honest with you, but
Well, before I ask you the next question, I'm going to just share some words from our sponsors. Applying for Italian citizenship? Need documents translation? Istituto Mondo Italiano provides certified translations and assistance services. Be sure to visit us at istitutomondoitaliano.org and schedule your free consultation. Un caffè, per favore. My first cup of coffee sets the tone for my entire day, and I get my coffee at La Prima Espresso. La Prima has been brewing Pittsburgh's best coffee for nearly 35 years. Try any of their in-house roasted varieties of beans from all over the world at home, or come and enjoy an espresso or a cappuccino at any of their locations, where their friendly baristas and familiar faces will make you feel at home. Visit laprima.com to get La Prima Espresso coffee at your door. Okay, so let's actually talk about you know, the way that the film portrays the immigrant community. There were also some specific choices made, and some of them were also dictated by tight budgets. But the way that I think everyone will agree that Nancy manages to make the ordinary extraordinary, and the extraordinary come in, you know, was shot as an ordinary scene. But also, you know, your father talks about how they decided to shoot certain things because the location was a little rundown, which we don't realize, right? So tell us a little bit about the portrayal of the neighborhood, and some of the choices that had to make for casting. And again, some of the shoots, because I think that's a richness that you can really take in from watching your documentary as they're talking about these choices.
Yeah, so from a budget perspective, you could never shoot Little Italy. You know, even the biggest of budgets would have a problem shooting Little Italy over multiple decades, just because it changes so much. And to create a period piece film is really challenging on a tight budget. So they actually went to North Carolina to shoot for Little Italy. So all of those exterior shots, and even the interiors were on sound stages and the same studios, Coralco Studios in North Carolina. And so they went there for that summer of 1992. And at that point, it had been around for, I want to say, about 8 to 10 years, the studio. And all these low budget productions were going in and filming New York there. But nobody was kind of keeping up with the facade of it and just making sure that it was looking right. And kind of when a film set would leave, anything that was run down was never kind of replaced or taken care of. So by the time that they got there, there were parts that were just in complete disrepair. And that influenced a good amount of those exterior shots where you just couldn't, you know, weeds were growing out of the buildings and the windows, and you just couldn't shoot things because then it would fully take you out of the experience and you would know you were not in Little Italy. So that influenced a lot of the shots, but what came out of it was really beautiful shots. My mom likes to talk about the Easter Sunday shot of these two little kids kind of stepping on each other's nice church shoes. And it looks like this perspective, like from God's point of view. But it was really that they just couldn't show that block because it was just looking so run down. So that's definitely, you know, part of it where you can use that to your strength, which my mom is very good at, and so is my dad from a budget perspective, because there is an art to how you spend your money on a low budget film. And then, you know, there were things like using a crane, which they only had a budget for one day to get a beautiful crane shot. And typically you would do that, you know, some big exterior shot. And what my mom wanted it for was to make sausage. She used this crane shot to show the women making sausage. So it was those moments that you really feel this like magical intimacy towards, and then you feel other moments play so grounded in reality, like when, you know, the ghost of Enzo appears. It's just, he's just there. He's not a ghost, you know that but it feels so much more grounded in reality than when you're making the sausage, because that's the spiritual experience.
And it's interesting because I think also, you know, when working together, Francine and and Nancy, your mother, on set, kind of really going into looking at the people in the neighborhood and imagining what's going on behind that door. We have this word in Pittsburgh, it's called stooping, like people sitting on their outside steps. And I don't know if it applies on in the other states as well. But you can definitely picture that a common scene in Italy, kind of the Facebooks.
Mm.
These ladies of back in the day, and being able to imagine and capture those moments, and also the irony when Jesus appears. I mean, it could not be a more boring time for someone, right? How many checker shirts did I manage to?
Oh, hundreds. They made it look like thousands, but hundreds of checkered shirts that actually my brother was I want to say kindergarten or first grade, my oldest brother. And after production wrapped, my mom just donated a bunch of those to his class. And so there were all these little kids running around in the red and white checkered shirts for, painting or any activities they needed like a little smock for.
Uh-huh.
A whole class used those red and white checkered shirts, and we still had more after that.
So, but in your understanding, also talking to your parents, what was that neighborhood, their real neighborhood, the Bronx, back in the day? Are there any stories that they talk that resonated with you, or some characteristics that you associated to the community back then?
Yeah, I mean, what was really beautiful is that they were actually, because they were shooting in North Carolina, nobody looked like or spoke like people from the neighborhood, from the Bronx or from Little Italy, for the purpose of the story. So they ended up recruiting my Aunt Martha and everybody she knew from the neighborhood to come and take their vacation
Uh-huh.
in North Carolina that summer and be extras, which they did and had a blast. And in the documentary, you see a lot of actually my aunt's home video footage that
Mhm.
she shot while being there. But I mean, I have my own memories from the neighborhood, just going and visiting my cousins and Christmas Eves there. And it was just always this huge sense of community, and everybody on the block knew each other. And I mean, in terms of stories that I heard growing up, definitely one that has always stuck out is my mom when she was pregnant with my oldest brother. There was a kind of like curmudgeonly older guy on the block who had heard my mom while she was stooping, sitting out, sitting outside, saying that she was craving artichokes.
Mhm.
He got so upset and he just left. He stormed off. He was like kind of nearby listening, and he got so upset that he stormed off. And she was like, "Oh, like what's his problem?" Talking to my aunt, "What's his problem?" And later that evening, he came back and he had gone to every market in the neighborhood and gotten the best artichoke from each one
Wow.
and made her a batch of baked artichokes, because he said a woman should never have a craving that she, when she's pregnant, that's not good. Superstition, that is not good. You can't let her crave that for too long. So he went out and chose the best of the best around the neighborhood. But that's just kind of the sense of community, that I grew up knowing, and the type of stories I grew up hearing about from the Bronx.
So let's talk about the casting, because you talked about Tracy Ullman before. Where is she originally from? Because that's not her typical accent, right? She had to work on it. She had to do some work, and then she made a specific choice of
Yes,
accent.
yes. Tracy Ullman is English. She's from the UK. Um, and so very, very different. But was really passionate about this story, and something that I love too with this casting is not all of it, all of the casting made sense to other people. Jonathan Demme, who is the executive producer for Household Saints, when he was being interviewed for the electronic press kit, had mentioned the casting of Tracy. When he heard about it, didn't make sense
Mhm.
to him, and he had felt that Tracy was so good at being an extrovert and playing very extroverted characters, and had seen her work and loved her work, but just didn't understand that casting decision. And then in his interview, honestly, it was so insightful and something that I had myself hadn't thought of till he said it. But what Tracy ended up bringing to the character ultimately was keeping that extrovertedness, that she just has naturally
Mm-hmm.
locked up and buried inside of a woman who is just dying for that to come out. And so you kind of see that underneath.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, was, my mom brought her to the Bronx, introduced her to the neighborhood for research, for the accent. And what she ended up using was, she had my mom record every single one of Catherine's lines to a tape recorder and listen to my mom's accent. And that's the one that Tracy ultimately used.
Mm-hmm. In addition to accents, obviously in acting, there are body postures, the actual acting. And we see some phenomenal from Nikki and Vince in two different scenarios. Vince, this man that is not in his own world. He's a veteran. And those were also the times where you didn't talk about what happened back then, what happened in war. So he tries to make connections.
With Nikki, yes,
Mhm.
yes. And from that time in Japan, tries to make connections, conflates, going to Chinatown and trying to connect with the people there. But ultimately, what it kind of, his experience is that of an outsider and just trying to find his place, which kind of connects back to Lily's character, to Teresa, feeling like an outsider from her community as well and trying to find her place. And I love that character. I love the character of Nikki. I love, I love the men in this film. People talk about the women in this film and their incredible, complex, exciting characters that we don't get to see often, but so are the men. The men have storylines that you don't see, but actually, I mean, again, going back to to the neighborhood and to the Bronx, and we know those men. My family, those are the men in my family, that have these layers that you just don't get to see in film very often. But they're incredible. The way, I mean, again, these stories, especially for Vince, especially for Michael, who plays Nikki, these actors had to go through different time periods of their lives, of these characters' lives, in a really short amount of time, and they did it beautifully. Hair and makeup and wardrobe helps tremendously, but only to a degree.
Exactly. And that's what you perceive, especially with Vince aging. And the way that he portrays his aging process is not those applied wrinkles that are going to make him authentic.
Exactly. It's not what's going to convince you.
Indeed.
It's his body language. It's the way that he's spoken. I mean, again, like there are certain characters like with Nikki, it's like you watch the light go out of his eyes.
Mhm.
Um, you can't do that unless you really know your craft.
Yeah. And he's always, I think it's probably a characteristic of his acting in general. In other well-known productions, that look, it's very peculiar of him. And going back to Nikki, I think the fact of not belonging because of his past and everything, I don't know, sometimes it could also be how a first generation immigrant feels like, because they have left something behind. They're in this new land, and what we say in Italian, over time, you're non sei né carne né pesce. You don't feel fully of one nor the other. You embrace both, but it is also how people perceive you, that you might not be one that of theirs anymore, and vice versa. So that's indeed a very can be a very painful journey or consideration. The how long was the actual production? How long was the movie? And then I would like to talk a little bit about what happened to the movie you touched upon, going missing, so to speak. But there are some intricacies that we are not from the industry, so we are interested in discussing. I think the closing on the movie, again, another little miracle happened there as far as envisioning how to connect the dots so that the audience wouldn't be confused or upset or anything. but just feeling having been embraced in a beautiful story that gets
Yep.
passed
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. So, and sorry, the first part of your question, say again.
Yes, so how, if we can tell a little bit about how the movie ends, or at least what was that moment that Nancy made a decision, this is kind of how this movie should be ending.
Yes, yes. So the movie originally started with the card game, with the pouring of the wine and the card game happening, which ultimately leads to Joseph having Catherine as his wife. What they realized, you always kind of do these test screenings to see how an audience is going to react before you officially release a film.
Okay.
And so in those test screenings, they realized that people were confused about if the story is real, if it's fake, what parts are they supposed to believe. And my mom's concern was that people would get upset because they didn't know how to take this story. Is this a fairy tale? Where is this kind of coming from? And so what's not in the novel, what ultimately they ended up going back in post-production, getting more time, and going back in and filming this scene with a family at a picnic table, telling the story of the miracle of the Sant'Angelo sausage and Teresa, the daughter behind that miracle. And that kind of what it ended up doing for the film is creating these little bookends to it, right? And making you feel like this was just like passed down from generation to generation. This was a neighborhood tale. And so it kind of beautifully wrapped it up while not telling you how to feel still, but putting it in a clearer context, maybe in a way that the book did without it, but in the translation into the film, that part got lost. So they needed to come up with a different way where you just give it that little bit of context back.
So the next question is, what happened? I mean, why did your parents want to revisit this movie? How the search
Yeah.
for the movie started again?
Yes. So, a number of years ago now, I think it was 2016 or 2017, Ira Deutschman, who was behind the distribution of the film, a huge part in the making of, getting the film greenlit to begin with, was teaching at Columbia University and wanted to screen Household Saints for his class. In doing so, my parents over the years had two kind of physical copies of the film, that they had gotten back in very kind of magical ways of their own. There was a film festival that meant to send the film reels back to the distributor. It got sent to my family's home instead. So my parents saved that, pocketed that. There was another instance where it was left behind in a movie theater, the film reels. So they took that then as well, took that home. So they had these two copies that they thought were pretty solid. They had sent those to their archives at UCLA, film archives. And so when Ira wanted to screen it, they said, yeah, we have two copies, just contact UCLA. When they checked those reels, they found that they had been damaged. At that point, that kind of began the search of my father kind of figuring out who to reach out to, who would have the elements to the film. And again, through kind of buying up different entities, at that point, the last person that had the distribution rights was Warner Brothers. So my father got in touch with Warner Brothers, with the vault at Warner Brothers, who basically told him, well, those rights expired. So we don't have the rights to the distribution anymore, which means probably those elements were destroyed because they're not ours. So we probably just destroyed them. So again, not having the film, not having gone to digital, never having been digitized, when you destroy those elements, you're destroying the film and any chance of somebody ever seeing it again. All you have is a very low quality VHS tape at best. But it's nothing to be able to screen, right? So luckily, my parents and my family friends, John Sayles and Maggie Renzi, who were a huge part of my parents' career, still are. They're very, very close to us. John Sayles' film, The Secret of Roan Inish, had exactly the same person who owned the copyright to the film originally, to own the copyright of The Secret of Roan Inish as well as Household Saints. So John Sayles' producing partner Maggie Renzi had already kind of figured out a way to get those rights back for Roan Inish. So with her advice, my dad basically tracked down the estate of that individual who had the copyright. Oh, you know what? I apologize. I'm gonna rewind a little bit because I missed a very important part. In the process of going to Warner Brothers, finding out that the elements might possibly be destroyed, he basically, again, many, many miracles happened. He was lucky enough to find somebody higher up on the ladder at Warner Brothers who just looked a little bit deeper. And they called him back after a couple weeks and told him, we found the elements. It's 100 boxes. Where do you want them shipped? At that time, my mom had all of her archives at the University of Michigan. So luckily, University of Michigan was able to take it because my parents' one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan could not fit 100 boxes. So it was sent there, and you have these elements, and this is why I wanted to rewind a little bit. You have these elements, but my parents didn't own the film. So
That's something that people don't understand. I mean, you work for whoever is going to produce, eventually they are the owners.
You become work for hire. Once you don't, most filmmakers don't own the rights to their film. It's very rare when they do. And so at least if you want that film to see the light of day, right? You have to have a distributor behind it. You have to have a marketing campaign behind it to make sure that it's being seen, that it's put in theaters, that people know about it. So that first part was, it was wonderful news that the elements were there and they existed. But then my father needed to figure out who owned the rights to that. And so again, that's where you come in of this Jones Entertainment Group, which was an entity that in this kind of piecemeal way of financing Household Saints, what this particular investor got was the copyright to the film. So he ultimately held that. And this man had 2 films in his roster of his copyrights, and they were John Sayles' The Secret of Roan Inish, and they were Nancy Savoca's Household Saints. And so Maggie Renzi, John Sayles' producing partner, had kind of forged the way, thankfully, and figured out how to gain the rights back to The Secret of Roan Inish. So she was a wonderful, great advisor to my father on how to do the same for Household Saints. This gentleman had passed away. It was now an estate. And that, that lawyer who was handling that estate was like, he has another film. He's got another one of these. Somebody else again is coming back for the rights. So thought that he was done with the estate, not quite, needed to reopen it up. And they negotiated. Ultimately, it was a happy ending. My parents negotiated a deal where they were able to buy the rights back to the film. So now they fully outright own Household Saints.
Yes. So just before we maybe mention about the restoration and how people will be able to enjoy that, this whole process allowed them also to start the nonprofit Missing Movies, which you had mentioned before, right?
Yes.
So that.
Yes. So Household Saints is really not an uncommon story of a missing movie. It's a lot more common than people realize. It was kind of just the film that when my parents have a problem, they tend to look around and for other people that share that problem in order to find a solution, right? And kind of create a community of sorts of, I can't be the only person dealing with this. It's kind of
and experts that might have gone through the process or a support.
Exactly. And so there are specialists for restorations. There are, again, like entertainment lawyers that know this complicated process. And every film, every missing movie has its own unique story. Some films are just being held hostage by the distribution companies. They just don't want to let it go, and they're not doing anything with it, right? So again, it's not being shown in theaters. It's not streaming. It's nowhere to be found. People
Sitting on
want
the shelf, so to speak.
exactly sitting on a shelf, and these filmmakers want their films back so that they can do something with it. But those are some hostage situations. Other filmmakers just don't know who owns it, who owns their movie.
Mhm.
And that requires research. So everybody has a unique story. And the mission of the organization Missing Movies is not only to find and missing movies and restore them and give them a revival, but to also teach filmmakers of all ages how to preserve their work,
Mhm.
how to know the process of making sure you are always keeping track of who owns your film, just to make sure that this stops happening and people have access to the movies that they love.
Mhm.
And then again, and how to make restoration more affordable. Film restoration is extremely expensive. So how do we democratize that, and make that more accessible to people? Because, these are some movies that if we don't have them, people always talk about like, oh, if it wasn't for this movie, we wouldn't have this one, right? The influence of past films. Well, if we don't have access to them, then we're missing out on not only incredible filmmakers and their work, but future work
Yes. Mhm.
that could be inspired by things if they were accessible to us.
So last two questions. One about the restoration and how will be people be able to enjoy it, but also mainly how people are going to be able to access your documentary.
Yes.
So, mhm.
Yes. So Household Saints is going to be released sometime in April on Blu-ray. And then as we get later into the spring, I believe it will be on streaming eventually. We don't have an exact date for that at the moment, but it's definitely coming. And then the documentary, Many Miracles of Household Saints, can be viewed through that Blu-ray DVD as an extra. And we're hoping to have it align with some streaming as well. We'll see what happens. Nothing official yet that I can say, but we have some wonderful screenings coming up. There's one in Columbus, Ohio next weekend at the Wexner Center for the Arts, which I'm really excited for both Household Saints and the documentary. It's always interesting when they play together and when they play apart, it's different reactions.
Uh-huh.
But a beautiful compliment I've gotten is that you don't need to have seen Household Saints to see the documentary.
Mhm.
So it is up to you which order you view them in, as long as you see them.
I think I mean personally, obviously because I find myself in that position, I think I'll be able to capture more and sense more, but knowing what went into it, and the fact that this is a little bit of uno scrigno del tempo, like it's a time capsule of something that happened 30 some years ago. Also with the conscious choice of Nancy not to retouch it because it would have been kind of, I don't want to say violating, but that was who she was at that time and what the message that she wanted to send. But again, also the shots, knowing that there are so many stories around about the aerial shots and the crane and the food, why is it so focused, and I mean, why there is such a focus on those everyday aspects again that make it really a jewel. So thank you for giving us that lens to be able to dive into personally, that would be my experience. So, but others that have had the luxury to see the movie by watching your documentary, they will probably watch it a second and a third time. So it works well for everyone.
Yes, that is the hope. That is the hope. And if you love Household Saints, if you just love film, if I think that there are many reasons. If you love, Italian heritage, Italian American heritage, I think my hope is that there's something, you find something in there for you personally.
Mhm.
And again, it's just all a conversation. The documentary to me is just one conversation about filmmaking, about family, about generations impacting other generations. I talk in the film about ancestors and how this film is really an ancestor of mine, and I think that's my biggest discovery.
Mhm.
is the impact that sometimes we don't know, we don't have to meet our ancestors to feel them and to feel an impact of them, or, you know, see certain features from an older picture of an ancestor you never met and say, oh, that's where my eyes come from. That's where my nose and my shape of my nose. I don't have a family member I knew that has my shape of my nose, but now I've met them, right? And so that's my hope, is that you could just kind of start thinking about your own story in that way too.
Yes, because as I said, it's almost like you were given a time capsule. I mean, it's like you're going back to 30 years, and then that kind of ties into the very first question of how that impacted you, because it almost as if you were really there and already out of your belly's, your mom's womb. And
There,
almost feeling it like you were, it was part of your growing up at this point. You just put images to some stories that probably you heard over the years.
absolutely. It's so funny. I've always been told that my middle name is not Teresa, but my father wanted to give me the middle name Teresa. And my mom said, are you kidding me? We don't want to name her after after this character that has some difficulty in life. We don't want to put that on her. And now looking back, I said, I don't think you had to give me that middle name for me to make certain connections. I think it was already there.
Well, Martina, our time together has been fabulous and very enjoyable, but unfortunately our hour is up. Big Ben ha detto stop, and it's time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. And we want to thank you for tuning in into the program. If you have any questions or comments, or if you have any topics you would like us to address, please contact us at theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, subscribe to the Italian Radio Hour on YouTube or where you catch your favorite podcasts. Thank you so very much for connecting with us, Martina, and sharing your story and your talent. Best of luck with all your future endeavors, and hopefully, maybe at some point, both the movie and the documentary are going to make it to Pittsburgh, but at least, you know, or at least on streaming platforms. We want to thank also our sponsors, Istituto Mondo Italiano and La Prima Espresso. And until next time, alla prossima. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you. Bye-bye.